I'm going to introduce Marty Reed, who can turn on his camera now and tune in. Marty's joining us from Vancouver. He's had a pretty long career, very interesting guy who's worked in a number of different businesses. He's also worked, as an entrepreneur, starting up several companies. He's worked on the investment side in venture. Spent a lot of his career down in the Silicon Valley region, and now he's up in Vancouver. And his company is called Evoke Innovations, and they do all sorts of really interesting work, working with major companies like Suncor, which I'm sure he's going to elaborate on. But what he brings to the table is the ability to identify innovations that really drive value to the bottom line of these big businesses. So I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting conversation that we're going to have. And I think I did a decent job, right, Brady? Did I miss anything?
That works for me.
Okay, great. So I'll turn it over to you, and looking forward to it.
Let me just start with, how do I get these slides back up on my screen?
Maybe Curtis can jump in on that.
If Curtis can jump in. They were there a minute ago. Oh, I've got it. All right. Hopefully folks can see my welcome screen.
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks, Tom, for the intro. And, you promised a lot of great speakers, so hopefully sometime today you can get one, but I'll do my best to, at least carry on the tradition a bit. And as Tom said, if there are any questions that come up, by all means, please interrupt. No need to wait till the end. We've got a slide deck here, but I'd much prefer a dialogue to just simply me talking for half an hour, 40 minutes. So with that, I'm going to just jump right in it. And I like to start with just a personal note. And so what you're looking at, the individual in the middle is my best friend and roommate from college. We both started our careers as US Naval officers. I got out after 4 years, moved to Silicon Valley. He stayed in, and this was a couple of us a few years back when he was the executive officer of an aircraft carrier. Fast forward to today, and he is now commanding officer of an aircraft carrier. And for those of you that haven't seen Top Gun, I'll jump to this slide, this is how we still operate U.S. aircraft carriers. Our flight ops are controlled by humans on the deck, standing in close proximity. It literally has not changed since we rolled out our first aircraft carrier, whatever that was, 75, 80 years ago. And of course, the challenge with aircraft carriers, this is where you're living. And actually, this is two things about this slide is, first off, these are officer quarters. These are junior military officers. This is effectively the exact same type of quarter I lived in when I was on a ship. The other thing I'll mention is they're all smiling, so it's probably their first day on the ship, because after you've been on a ship for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, there's not nearly as much smiling, but that's for a different conversation. So obviously when COVID broke out, it sent ripples through the military, and an understanding that this little tiny virus is about to bring down a $15 billion machine. And my good friend Hack was fortunate. His ship wasn't nearly as impacted, but for those of you who saw the news, there was an aircraft carrier that had to pull into Guam and effectively abandon ship. Obviously, the Navy is rethinking, okay, what are we going to do about this? How do we think about the future? But it also got me thinking to something else, which was, here's a photo of, typical food line. This is actually not an aircraft carrier. This is actually a work camp up at Fort McMurray, which still looks a lot like this. You've got a massive industrial complex being run by, a group of humans that each morning show up, get a debrief, head out, and do their work. And so it got me thinking the similarities between what the U.S. Navy experience was and what my partners at Suncor and Synovus are going through. and frankly, we got lucky. Like a lot of us, we were unprepared for this virus to come in, but it's absolutely forcing all of us to rethink how we operate our workforce and how do we create environments that don't expose us like we did over the past 3 months. So with that, I'm going to jump a little bit now to the sort of what I do at Evoke, and I suspect some of you have seen this slide. I didn't create it. It's been around. It's a few years old, but it's just talking about digitalization in the various sectors. I came from Silicon Valley, where I spent the bulk of my career, usually in that upper right-hand category, information communication technology. I began working in oil and gas and then into mining. Obviously, a lot of work on the construction side as it relates particularly to the resource sector, which is quite literally at the opposite end of this. And so it was this framework that ultimately led to a series of conversations I began having with Suncor and Cenovus back in 2015, where we said, hey, how can we bring a bit of Silicon Valley sort of approach to innovation and technology to the resource sector? And so what we did is we created Evoke, and we launched Evoke with a pretty clear mandate to look for opportunities and technologies and entrepreneurs around the world that we thought could bring value to the operations, improve the bottom line, with an eye towards both environmental impact and economics. And so we now invest in companies wherever they may be, particularly early stage companies, and in some cases even creating these companies on our own. We bring a team from Evoke that has prior experience building companies, and we work with our startups to help them hopefully become more successful. We think about the world in kind of two ways, which is one, we have a number of companies here that are in the physical sciences. They're building, building hardware, apply, physics, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, all of which though have a strong digital component. And then about half of our portfolio is just pure digital solutions. And it started with a notion that we have to move beyond sort of where we have been historically, which is kind of traditional SCADA systems, fairly simple controls, all housed in a central control office or control center. And how do we move to a more distributed nature? And so as we've moved forward, again, we're making probably 3, 4, 5 investments a year in new companies, new technologies. Some of them are ready for prime time and are being deployed at our partners, and some of them are still sort of developing their solutions and are probably 6 months, 12 months, 2 years away from being ready for prime time. But what I wanted to do here this morning was kind of step through from my lens. What are the steps that we see that someone like a Suncor can take as they think about obviously any of their existing operations that are brownfield? How do we help improve those? How do they think about future turnarounds, which for Suncor obviously is a major part of their operating budget. Their capital expenditures each year is somewhere north of whatever is $6-8 billion just on maintenance. And then certainly, how do we think about greenfield opportunities, not only in oil and gas, but especially as we think about the future of energy and what that may look like. So with that, I'm going to step through some of these, give some framework, and especially as we move into this, I'll be looking for Tom. If he's got any questions or comments, by all means, interrupt. I would welcome that. So.
Yeah,
all right, I'm going to start with sort of step one, and this should not surprise any folks here, but you really need to know what's going on and what do we have. And so there's this classic challenge of we've done all of our planning, we've got our designs, our schedules, our budgets, you name it, but rarely does that actually match what's going on in the field.
Hey, Marty, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay. No, it took a minute. I turned the mic on, but there was a delay, I guess. No, on the last slide, I just wanted to, I guess, question these. I mean, for clarity, from Suncor's perspective, investing in these companies is venture, but it's the intent isn't necessarily to make money with these companies. These companies are going to be successful and they're going to grow and they're going to make money. But really, Suncor's main interest is making sure that they increase their bottom line, create new efficiencies, expand their business. I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, so this was fundamental in our discussion of how we set up Evoke, which was historically someone like a Suncor would get involved with a company, and obviously they're thinking about their bottom line, as they should. So how could we invest in a company? I'll pick one at the top of the screen, like Dark Vision. How can we support a Dark Vision in sort of best advantage ourselves? The challenge is sort of the traditional way that large companies engage with startups is they do things like try to lock up intellectual property, get exclusive rights, keep it kind of secretive and confidential and not share with their partners or their sort of peers at other companies. Yeah. And so we said, listen, if
risk too, to like removing potential competition from the future.
Absolutely. And so what we said was, listen, we Evoke have to be independent from you, Suncor. We have to align our interests with those of the companies we invest in. So when we invest in use Dark Vision as an example, by aligning ourselves with the founders, what does that mean? That means if they're successful, we're successful. I, Marty Reed, am successful. The folks on the Evoke team are successful from a financial perspective. And the view is there's just no better mechanism to achieve success than capitalism. The market will figure out a way, a good entrepreneur will figure out a way. And so how do we align that fundamental capitalist need that we have with the needs of Suncor Cenovus that don't necessarily, their number one priority is not the well-being of the founders of Dark Vision. Their priority is how do they get that technology integrated into their system. And so we had to create this balance that is well aligned. So each quarter I get a review, or not each quarter, every 6 months I get a review from a performance review, probably like most of the folks on this call do, from the executive team at Suncor saying, hey, here's the challenges we're looking for Evoke to help solve. And here's what we're seeing from you and how you're performing against that. In much the same way that a VP of innovation or R&D would be evaluated. And so that's how we've structured it.
How do those target those goals, those core challenges? How do they get flushed out within Suncor? Do they have a process to bring issues forward or innovation ideas, or are you engaged with the organization on the ground, understanding the business and identifying opportunities?
It's both. We're pretty tightly tied in with a lot of the folks there. We've got a small team, but we know hundreds of folks within the organization, such that if we're working on a water solution, we know the water team. If it's a tailing solution or a turnaround, you name it, we've got contacts. Most of what we start with are fairly high level, oftentimes ESG metrics. How do we improve the environmental performance? How do we knock down the cost in this one particular area? The interesting challenge we face, particularly as it relates to digital, and we'll get to this example later, but a company like Kelvin, when you go ask existing operators or subject matter experts, hey, what do you think about this new solution? And it's a digital solution that brings autonomy. The first thing they do is say, well, this looks like a job killer for me. So generally they're going to be inclined to not support it. And we've faced that more times than not. I'll share it. I think it's really crude, but it makes me laugh, which is when we bring some of these solutions, the expression we've sort of adopted is, if you go ask a turkey if he's going to vote for Thanksgiving or Christmas, generally the answer is going to be no.
Yeah.
And so what I will say is, if you are driving a digital initiative, you have to have leadership from the very top of the organization, and not only executive leadership from the board. They have to be supportive of this.
So you need an educated group that's focused on innovation at the top level, which can be a challenge in some organizations. But it sounds like Suncor is very focused on driving new efficiencies and exploring new technology solutions.
Yeah, there's always the fine line, though, between committing and saying you're committed to innovation and actually making that happen. And never for a moment underestimate the sort of the inertia of the status quo. And obviously everything that we do, whether it's in the Suncor side or the construction side, there are massive consequences, massive costs if something goes wrong. And so we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we test this in a way that minimizes that risk? Obviously, we can't do anything that would put human lives in danger. Also, that's another important consideration. But the beauty of digital solutions are increasingly you can set up a sandbox and test it, play with it, and if it doesn't work, turn it off. It's not like you're trying to build a $7 billion project. Generally, these digital solutions you can pilot for 50K or less, 100K. And learn and experiment.
So these I mean, I might slow your whole presentation down here, but
it's good.
You ask questions, so I'm going to do it. But these companies that are on the screen, obviously, they went through a process to get to a point where now there's an investment in place and they're being utilized. So if I was a small company and I had a nifty product and I thought maybe Suncor could use it, can I bring it? How do I get on this list? How do I get my logo on this list?
Yeah. So first off, we've got offices in Calgary, Vancouver, Silicon Valley. We spend a lot of time in places like Houston, Boston, Denver. We probably look at or get introduced to 1,000 companies a year. We'll end up only investing in probably 3 of those. It's the rough ratio. What happens? We get introduced, we see it, whether you introduce it, our friends introduce it, someone at Suncor, we don't really care how it gets to us. And we are always open if you've got an idea, always happy to take a look. And then it just goes through a process where our team takes a look and gets a sense, is this a team that we believe in? Is this a problem worth solving? And then we pull in the subject matter experts at our partners at Suncor and Cenovus and say, hey, you guys have been working on this longer than we have. What do you think? And for some of those challenges, it's solving a well-known established problem and it's a direct replacement. Hey, this looks better than this. Do we agree? Yeah, but for some of these, it's an entirely new field. And so in those,
and there's a change management challenge as well with when you look at products. I mean, that's probably the core of the problem.
Yeah, and this goes back to a lot of the learnings from Silicon Valley. By definition, a lot of what we view or think of as innovation coming out of Silicon Valley are products and solutions that never existed before, and maybe we thought was crazy. The idea of an Airbnb and you, Tom, I've never met you in person, and you'd come stay in my house. Those are the sort of things that Silicon Valley has always been great at launching. And the idea was, how do we, again, bring a bit more of that willingness to experiment into a more conservative sector like oil and gas, mining, construction.
So to be on this list, is there always an investment in place, or is it sometimes it's just you're searching for great products to bring in and it's a tool that they should just buy rather than invest in?
This is the list of companies we've invested in. We are pretty frequently, though, making introductions of companies to our partners. We just say, listen, this isn't a good fit for us. We don't need to invest. They're already beyond where they need our support, but you should take a look at it. And put that in sort of the scouting box. And certainly we do a good bit of that as well.
Okay.
All right. Well, that was a good little intervention.
I'm trying to let you get back to your presentation so you don't lose.
That's all right. No, by all means. All right. So I was sort of stepping through the stages of how we think about it, and so the power of visualization is incredible. And here's some metrics, you can read them, but there's a reason why we all now carry smartphones with us, iPads, laptops, you name it. It's because it's just easier for the brain to digest this information. And so this is one example. Everyone has talked about digital twinning. If you're not fully embracing digital twinning, then you're missing an enormous opportunity. And more specifically, it's overlapping both the visual with artificial intelligence. And so this is just one example by one of our companies, Verum, based in Calgary, where they are able to digest just an enormous amount of data almost instantly. They had a great example during COVID of a mine in South Africa. Obviously, they couldn't go visit it. And they said, listen, here's a secure link, upload all the data you have. And within a day and a half, they had produced a full digital twin, and the operating team down in South Africa was using it. And so you've got to be able to adjust it really quick. And then the key is you start running algorithms against it that are getting smarter and smarter. And so this example, number 3, their algorithm quickly identified, hey, there's this gap, this flange isn't going to fit, and let's adjust this before we get on site and correct these. So again, the pace of innovation in this is amazing. Maybe more to the point, there's been a lot of hype about digital twins for a long time, and I think we're actually now starting to realize that value from it.
So they have their product basically captures LiDAR data, converts it to a model, then analyzes the models for anomalies.
It'll pull in any data, but yes, absolutely LiDAR data, and equally important, pull in all your design work, and then layer that with your LiDAR. They're not in the business of capturing that data. There's a million third parties that will capture that for you with drones, trucks, you name it. But it's the ability to quickly digest it and then act on it is the key. I'm going to talk about step 2, and this is the one that's perhaps hardest to visualize. But the basic challenge, I will say, is we all now have way too many systems. We've got applications, we've got SCADA systems, we've got scheduling systems, you name it. And the challenge is, how do we get all these to talk to each other? And how do we integrate it into a single pane of glass? And so, again, this is a company, SensorUp. This is a slide that will probably make no sense, and as I thought about how to better represent it. But the key is tools like a SensorUp that have been specifically built to be able to speak the language of all the various systems out there and pull it into a single pane of glass, such that that the system that your supplier over here is using can talk to the system your other supplier is using, can talk to all your field workers, all on a single system. How you pull that in, also layering in GIS, I might add, which is critical. And so SensorUp is another company that came out of Calgary. It's actually a professor from U of C, whose initial project was with the US Department of Homeland Security, who coming out of 9/11 realized that they had, whatever it was, something like 20 different agencies on site. These are all the 3-letter acronyms, the FBI and the Secret Service and CIA, and all trying to figure out what's going on. The problem was none of them could talk to each other. They were all on different platforms. And so SensorUp came in and built that first integrated system, and then realized that, frankly, it was a lot easier to work with construction and energy companies than US Secret Service and other agencies. So have now built a tool specific to our world. I'm going to keep moving on just so we can make sure we've got time for some questions. Managing by exception. Now, this is something we've all done for years. We've always had, SCADA systems and alarms, and hey, tell us when this gets, to a certain temperature, or the water tank gets, filled beyond a certain point. We are moving way beyond that now, and so here's one platform that uses computer vision. And again, if you're not using computer vision tools, the speed at which this is coming on is fairly remarkable. To the extent that it's actually become quite controversial over the last 2 weeks, because increasingly folks in China, police forces have been using it for facial recognition. I want to be clear, that's not what we are talking about here. This is one of our companies, Asperity. They actually will not provide any facial recognition, but for a whole host of other solutions, again, the need to use computer vision, it just increases productivity across your entire site. And so effectively anything that a human eye can discern, you can train a computer to discern. Here are a few examples. I'm just going to jump to this slide here, and here are a few more. How do you reduce truck trips and inspections and folks wandering around the site and checking boxes? You can do that with a camera. On the environmental use cases, again, if you can see a water spill, you can pick it up on a camera and use computer vision to do that. I think most interestingly, on the from a construction perspective, is the EHS impact, particularly identifying humans that shouldn't be in a given area or may not have the right PPE. All of that can be done with computer vision these days.
So, biometrics and sort of like gathering information on workers as to where they are is a kind of a sensitive topic, obviously. But there's huge advantages to that from a safety perspective. And obviously there's ways of understanding productivity. There's ways of understanding and automating, timesheet data collection, that kind of thing. Do you see that evolving over time where workers are more comfortable with the idea of being tracked digitally? I mean, right now there's a punch card system in various ways that they're tracked biometrically, but it's not done through cameras. Is it just that it's basic, or is there a union issue? What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, there's a lot of issues there. What I will say is, obviously there are various controls. So in the case of Asperity, they're not trying to track individual workers. They are just tracking meta. So is there a human in an area where they shouldn't be? Mm-hmm. Obviously, there are solutions out there that will track individuals, and certainly increasingly everyone has wearables on, from gas detection and man down and you right. name it. And unions have certainly weighed in. Privacy, security, other concerns have been a factor. What I will say, and what we're generally seeing, is if there is a clear EHS component to it, the likelihood of resistance is relatively low. It's hard to argue and fight those. And I think we're on just this inevitable slope, call it a slippery slope, if you will, but we'll just keep adding a feature, and in 5 years, this notion will be sort of behind us, and all notion of sort of security, privacy on the workplace will be gone. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, but I think it's inevitable that the efficiencies that you can drive with this, with these technologies. I'll also say you've seen part of this happen as manufacturing facilities have opened up. A lot of them have required workers to, there's a number of wearables, but the most common one is it looks like a simple Fitbit, but it tracks where you are, who you interact with for COVID tracking purposes.
Right, that makes perfect sense.
And in a COVID world, how could you fight that? Who's going to say, no, I don't want to do this? The difficulty is, of course, once you've rolled that out, are you going to take it away? If you're the company that now can use this also to think about how do we optimize and streamline our operations, I think it's, again, as these things get added, I rarely see them go away. So.
Yeah, well, there's just always been a challenge with, the buddy system with hitting the punch clock or whatever the case is. I was at a large scale industrial project in Sarnia, Ontario yesterday, and that was one of the issues that the client was having was that the workers were leaving at 1 o'clock and punching out at 3 o'clock. So it's always it's worth it to have the systems in place, but it is kind of invasive, and then nobody likes the big brother effect. But certainly the technology can solve those types of problems.
Well, the first use case for Asperity actually was as it related to billing. And so a crew would report on their billing sheet that they were there for 5 hours, and the camera would pretty easily say, well, your truck pulled up at 9 and left at 11. That's not exactly 5 hours of work, so you owe us. And again, good use case for a camera. So. All right, I'm going to jump ahead here. This is, I've got these next two are perhaps the most controversial. So no question where we are going is we are yielding control. And the use case I will give is this company of ours, Kelvin. And you can read high level, but at the highest level, making machines think for themselves is a great tagline. And I'll jump to the impact. This is real life data. It's public. BPX, which is a unit of BP, published this data. You can go see it. This was in an existing brownfield application where they had the usual humans that would drive around in a truck and check out an asset and tweak a dial and a knob, repeat. What Kelvin does is put sensors on there, understands the variables. What are the humans actually doing when they get on site? And then it has a pretty simple interface where you say, okay, what are we trying to optimize for? It might be cost reduction, it might be production. Each situation might be a little different, but once you set the goal, the computer then just sits about and just does these little micro tweaks to the controls until it optimizes for whatever goal you wanted. And so in that case, it was humans adjusting things from once to twice a day. The computer started making adjustments about 3 times a second. Did that over about 4 months, then showed the results of that to BP, at which point then BP said, great. And they've now yielded all control of these systems to the computer. And so my basic thesis is any operation where we have humans making judgments on a fixed number of variables, that is probably going to yield or be yielded to the computer. Computers can just do that faster. And fixed number of variables, meaning there are 4 or 5 things. One of the challenges where humans are still required, obviously, if you're on a work site and there's a million variables from weather to other factors, cars, trucks, you name it, still difficult for computers. But if you've got a discrete number, computers will just flat out just do it better. Some of you may have seen this. This hit the market, I think, earlier this year, but I've seen it. And it's an autonomous dog that goes on industrial work sites, and it has functionality that obviously some are paying for. Boston Dynamics thinks there's a market there. But when I look at what impact do I think this will have, for a host of reasons, I just don't think it quite hits the mark. What we're really looking for is this, which is, a humanoid robot that has highly articulate fingers and is a biped. Why? Because the entire built environment was built for folks that look like us. And so we can either make specific robots for specific applications, but those will be pretty limited, or we move towards this area, which is making the robots live in our world. And so this is where I think we need to get. The question is sort of, where are we in this process? and I'll encourage you, if you want to have your mind blown, to take a look at a company called Sanctuary AI. They're based here in Vancouver. One of the founders, previously created the world's leading quantum computer, a company called D-Wave. The other founder is known for creating a humanoid robot that she's trying to get to the point where it can serve as a surrogate for herself. And you can see what this mission statement is. And they are really trying to develop human-like intelligence in fully autonomous general purpose robots. And again, general purpose meaning it can kind of do anything. Where are we in this? Here's where they are today. And so this is actually a real life example. They now have a project that's been funded by the federal government, along with a few others in partnership with Rogers, where they're now training doctors and nurses to do remote COVID testing using a robot like you see on the right. And her fingers are dexterous enough to be able to perform the somewhat infamous swab testing that we've seen as necessary for COVID testing. So this is happening today. You know, it's obviously a very specific use case, particularly in response to COVID. But if we go back to how we started this conversation, and you think about applications like an aircraft carrier or a site like Christina Lake, one of Synovus's field operations, where you have work camps. Imagine just getting all of those humans out of the work camp, having the work still be done by a human, but have it being done with an individual wearing an Oculus and wearing a digital glove. And then you've got a team of robots on site, and you don't need to worry about things like PPE and EHS completely change in that type of environment. And that's where I think we're heading. And obviously this will take time, but the pace at which this is coming online is faster than a lot of us may well want to admit or acknowledge. So anyways, with that.
Super sci-fi. I mean, we've seen this concept in movies often, but it does make perfect sense. And you started your presentation talking about a $20 billion military asset that can be shut down by a microscopic virus that just infects all these people that are working in close proximity. So, and then let alone the cost of bringing food and all the life safety systems and all these various things that we need to put onto those the military ships, or a remote rig in the middle of the ocean, or a work site way up in the north. Obviously, huge cost benefit if you can take the transport of the human and the temporary relocation of them out of the equation, right? So the value proposition is huge. There's a lot of different companies that are working on robotics. I mean, they're not all bipedal, but I could see the advantage of having a worker robot that could basically do everything a human can, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Amazon is a great example. If you build your distribution center optimized for robots, you can make the robot look like whatever it looks like. And if you've seen the videos or been to one of their facilities, they've got these little, they look like pallet trucks basically running around and picking and packing. But again, for the rest of the world that's already built and around us, if we're going to have both humans and robots interacting in them, they probably need to look more like us, because that's how we've built the world. And things that even my 3-year-old could figure out, how to open a doorknob, is still actually pretty hard for a robot, which is again why I think the path we're going to go down is these robots that look more like us.
So is that I don't know, you've got, so that's in your presentation there.
That was my last slide. So
we do have we're kind of approaching the end of the hour, and our next session does start at 1, but I don't know if there's any good questions that came through, but certainly one of the things that I thought about was what overall, like from your perspective, thinking about the future, And you're obviously a deep perspective with Suncor, and they do a lot of BRP, oil and gas type work. But are you seeing big trends in design and offsite prefabrication? Do you see this? I mean, in Suncor must be doing this quite often, but do you see this as the way to the future?
Actually, can you hear me? I keep getting this message that my microphone is not working.
I can hear you fine. If you can.
Okay. All right. Good. Sorry. Prefabrication, was that the question?
Yeah, generally, like, what does the future hold? I mean, if you extrapolate all these trends and you look at, if you look at from a software perspective, from a design integration perspective, what do you see as, what do you think the impact specifically around prefab and offsite is going to be?
Yeah, unquestionably, that is the path. I think the day of large, massive one-off builds are probably behind us. We will move more and more to modularization, more and more to offsite. No question, that's the trend. Just period.
No, Suncor obviously has a global supply chain that they need to manage, right? There's vessels being made, I'm sure, all over, like Germany and South Korea, Italy, all over the place, being brought together to actually assemble a refinery or a chemical plant or whatever the case is. So managing a global supply chain, especially when all this material needs to be transported to a remote site, must be extremely complicated. Is Suncor deploying digital systems to manage and track all those components coming from all over the planet? And was that included in some of these startups, or are you using other systems like Jovix or whatever the case is? Like, what do you see around supply chain? Because I think it is an area that generally construction has overlooked, whereas industrial is a lot more advanced on.
Yeah, I'm not going to say they're a lot more advanced, but they're certainly taking it more. They're taking a very serious run at improving that. And so, actually, one of the companies I referenced earlier, SensorUp, one of their sort of premier initial clients is a rail logistics company, Can Do. If you're familiar with them, and it's kind of exactly this idea of let's know exactly where everything is at all times. It's astounding to me that right now I can pull out of my pocket and for $5 hail an Uber and at all times know where that vehicle is. Mm-hmm. Yet if I'm a construction site, I just ordered $75,000 worth of whatever my part is, and I didn't even realize it's been sitting at the gate for 2 hours.
You're right.
And those days just have to end. And so the good news is, as batteries have gotten better, as GPS has gotten better, as sensors have gotten better, you're going to see just a massive proliferation of intelligence on all of these things as we build in tracking. And that can be good, can be bad, meaning we'll suddenly be flooded with information that we then need to optimize and present in digestible ways.
What are the long-term trends? I mean, Suncor, obviously, their business is oil and gas for the most part, I think, right? There's obviously probably an initiative to look at expanding their operations to include more renewables. Is that an area that you've been working with them on, and are they focused on those areas, like around innovation and exploring companies and opportunities?
Yeah, I'll be clear. I'm arm's length from Suncor, and so I don't want to speak too much on their behalf. But what I will speak to is a general trend for which Suncor and Mark Little, the CEO, has certainly spoken to recently. But a pretty firm belief that the energy mix will continue to transition. Yes, renewables will be a larger and larger piece of that, but it will also have pretty dramatic impact in transportation sector, new fuels like hydrogen, obviously electrification of vehicles are all going to be coming online. And so I think when it has some pretty significant ramifications when you think about the infrastructure necessary to support these things. Mm-hmm. We've got liquid fuels pretty well dialed in, but I'm in downtown Vancouver, and if you tried to electrify all the bus fleet tomorrow, you'd have a real problem doing so. And so I think there's enormous opportunity in that infrastructure world. to build some of these systems of the future, particularly as it relates to electrification. It just has, again, different infrastructure needs than what we've used with liquid fuels.
So we probably have to wrap up, but so if you're a major company and you're looking for assistance on your innovation strategy and change management, et cetera, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, I put my my email up there, which is Marty at Evoke Innovations, as well as LinkedIn, and we are absolutely happy to talk to any folks working on these types of challenges. We see the overlap between industries is, it's probably an 80-90% overlap in the challenges, which is how we started with oil and gas, but now spend a good bit of our time in the mining sector. We're talking forestry sector here in BC, obviously the construction sector. The challenges are similar, and so we're always happy and open to have conversations and see if we can't help out in some way.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Marty. I really appreciate your time. Great presentation. Great. I enjoyed the chat, and hopefully we'll have that opportunity in person at some point in the near future.
Sounds good. All right.
Great. And we're going to move on to the next session. We'll see everybody over there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Cheers.
Bye.